I present to you this EA500LM, the successor to the highly successful EA500. So let's just have a look at the price and the packaging for this EA500LM. Listed here in Linsoul Audio, okay, you can already place it on pre-order, okay, at 89.99 US dollar. And also, if you are in Malaysia, you can also place a pre-order for this EA500LM through Red Ape Audio Malaysia, priced at 479 Malaysian ringgit. Pretty much physically, it is identical to EA500, because one thing that I noticed is that the shell is still the same, despite appearing slightly darker compared to EA500. But what's different is what's inside. Okay, let's just have a look at the driver itself. It is still a single dynamic driver, but now it is released as second generation DMDC single dynamic driver, as opposed to fourth generation composite DLC of the EA500. Also, the impedance rating has been increased all the way to 21 ohm from 16 ohm of the EA500, and also the sensitivity pretty much remains the same. Depending on which nozzle you use, it will determine the sort of sound that you will be hearing from this EA500LM. So let's just talk a bit more about this three tuning nozzle. The one that comes attached with this EA500LM, the default one, if you look closely under the light like that, okay, detach it, you would notice that there is a foam inside the nozzle itself of medium density. That is the stock nozzle, okay? And if you look at the other nozzle, which is the one with the least amount of foam, that is pretty much, I would consider as a treble nozzle, okay? And the other one, which is a lot thicker than the medium one, you can visibly see that the density of the foam is much thicker. So how does it sets the differences between the sort of output that you're getting from the EA500LM? Let me just simply put it this way, okay? With the least amount of foam inside the nozzle, you're gonna hear a lot more of treble region sound frequency, okay? And with the most amount of dampening, there's a suppression of the upper frequency of the sound itself, and a lot more, or should I say, some emphasis on the lower frequency. So if you prefer, if you are treble sensitive, prefer not to hear too much treble, you would want to go into the thicker density foam. And if you want to hear a bit more of sparkle and energy on the upper frequency, you go for the least amount of dampening in the nozzle itself. So let me just clarify this upfront. The tip that I'm using here, pretty much 60% of the time will be these KZ foam tips, because my ear, as always, will always work better with foam tips rather than silicone tips. And why? I will just simply explain it like this. When I use the silicone tips, the sort of sound which I'm getting from this EA500LM is something which I would consider as kind of a bit not as pleasant as how I would prefer it. I'm hearing some sort of lower frequency reverb and resonance, which I think making this EA500LM somewhat a bit too bassy for my taste. But when I attach something like this KZ foam tips here, it does help to control a bit of that bass or lower frequency energy to a point that I would consider it closer to neutral target. When we talk about sound and performance, this is no rocket science, okay? I'm just going to make it as simple as possible. This EA500LM arrived on the tail of the successful EA500 or even EA1000, which I have reviewed recently. The very same formula, the very same tuning from the same people. So you can be rest assured that you can expect the sort of quality that is to be expected from EA500 series from Simgot. For example, this EA500LM, I am hearing the similar sort of sound tuning to EA500, pretty much almost identical, with an exception on several areas, which I will touch a bit later. So let's talk about driving this EA500LM first. This is definitely, as noted earlier, offering a bit more of impedance rating. So which means that, all right, it is less sensitive compared to EA500 or especially EA1000, which is even more sensitive, okay? The good thing is that it scales really well with power. The more power you put to this EA500LM, the better it will sound. When we talk about the rest of the sound frequency itself, how it presents a sound, Pretty much similar to EA500. This is very well balanced, I would say, especially when I use KZ foam tips on it. Okay, the way it present the sound frequency all the way from the upper frequency, mid-range to the lower frequency is well balanced. There's no particular emphasis, okay, in any of the sound frequency which I would consider as being warm, dry, or bassy or anything like that. This is just simply a close to neutral target IEM depending on what tips you use. The keyword here is what tip you use. Okay, so let's talk about the dynamic energy itself. Okay, this is super smooth and mature sounding IEM. Okay, the sort of sound which I would consider as that you can expect from more expensive IEM in the market nowadays. Let's just go straight to the main differences between EA500 and EA500LM. Okay, when I spend quite a bit of time trying to ascertain the differences between EA500 and EA500LM, especially when I use the silicon tip, I would just simply say that when I use the stock nozzle, the key differences is that the lower frequency. Okay, this is a bit more focused on the lower frequency with the note width itself. So there's a bit more of richness to the tuning on the lower frequency, which I think I can understand because most of the time, the audience, the market nowadays prefer something which is like a more full-bodied bass performance rather than upper frequency. So a matter of saying is that I also sense that this EA500LM, it sounds a bit roll off on the upper frequency resolution when compared to EA1000 or even EA500. Another key differences would be the sound stage, how it presents the staging of the sound itself. And I can safely say that EA500LM brings improvement over the original EA500, which is wider and more open sounding soundstage, especially when I use this big bore foam tips here. Not so much on the silicon tips, but if you try it with big bore foam tips, you can be rest assured that you'll be hearing wider sense of soundstage. EA500LM does not have any problem at all, scoring very impressive on the score table here at 86. Pretty much the total score identical to EA500, which was reviewed almost over 1 year ago, okay, and just slightly lower than EA1000. Okay, so comparing it directly with EA1000, EA1000 is a bit more refined with the resolution itself, with the imaging, and it is a bit more resolving, a bit more analytical as compared to this EA500LM. But in contrast, I would even say that this EA500LM is a bit more musical and more natural sounding as compared to EA1000. And when compared against EA500, I already mentioned that there's some indication that the lower frequency has been enhanced on this EA500LM as compared to EA500, and the upper frequency appeared to be slightly roll off just to give you a bit of sense of less offensiveness to the sparkle and the energy on the upper frequency, which is again to me a very positive thing, especially if you use a denser and thicker tuning nozzle. All in all, I would just simply put it this way. Simgot is on the right track. They have been doing it right since 2022, 2023, and now seemingly the same will be 2024 as well. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. What they do is just simply improve upon what is already proven to be successful, which is the way they tune and produce their IEM and even dongles. Okay, such is the case for this EA500LM.